maybe let's just go.
Yeah.
If anyone else is here and would like to turn on their cameras and join in this amazing session, now would be a good time. Otherwise, we're just going to start.
I mean, the full list of participants you can see if you go to the people, but I don't know if anybody else would like to share the video.
That's okay.
We've got a few more following that prompt. How do we see them?
Sometimes it takes a minute for the your camera and stuff to catch up. Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and kick things off. And if more people want to turn their cameras on, then you can, and hopefully Phil will take care of that in the background for me. So, hi everyone. It's really nice to see some faces and some names, some familiar names and some new names for me as well. So hopefully you get to meet some new people today. Thanks very much for coming along to this workshop. I have some slides to share where I'm kind of just like figuring my way out around this platform as well. So I apologize in advance for any technical hitches, but I'm going to kick things off with a few words and some slides and to give you some more information on how this is going to run today. So hopefully I can share my screen. Just bear with me for a second. Okay. Hopefully you can see my slides. Yes?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So, as you hopefully know, the topic of today's workshop is understanding scientific and practice-based questions for design neurocognition research. So the workshop today is going to be chaired by myself and Phil Cash. And it's run by the Cognitive Design Science SIG of the Design Society. So the focus of that SIG is really looking at everything to do with the designing mind and brain. So we look at design cognition, design neurocognition, research on design in other related fields, cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, and we also look at the applications of those different fields. So today we're going to focus primarily on design neurocognition and specifically looking more on the impact side of things. And I'm going to talk more about what we actually mean by impact or how we interpret impact in a few minutes' time. So we've got two main objectives for today. First of all, we want to have a discussion around what the kind of key opportunities are for design neurocognition research to create impact, not just scientific impact and not just practice-based impact either, thinking even more broadly potentially at where we can have impact from a societal perspective as well. And we're also going to explore some of the potential pathways towards actually achieving those impacts. And I'm going to talk a bit more about the background behind how this workshop came about and why we want to look at this topic in particular and get your perspectives around impact in design neurocognition research. So a little bit on the schedule for today. So we had advertised that we were going to kick things off with short presentations from researchers in the field. But when we reflected a little bit on where we've been on this journey so far and what we want to achieve today, we decided to change the plan a little bit. So we spent quite a lot of time over the last few years interacting with many of you in the community to develop a shared roadmap for design neurocognition research, looking primarily at the topics and challenges in this area. And that roadmap really is kind of a distillation of the state of the art in the field and the perspective of lots of researchers working in the area. And in the course of developing that roadmap, we've heard from lots of researchers on the work that they're doing and the knowledge that they are developing and contributing. So we thought that rather than spend time hearing presentations from different researchers, we would present this roadmap to you and show you where we're at with that. as a way to kick off this discussion. And that gives us more time later for the really important bit, which is hearing your perspectives about how design neurocognition research can have impact, which is what we want to achieve today. So I'm going to kick things off with an overview of that roadmap. And then we're going to talk a little bit about our approach to the workshop today and a method we're going to use called logic modeling. We'll then have a short break, and then we'll go into some discussion activities, which is the main activity for today, and I think what we're most looking forward to, getting some interaction between everyone and getting your input into this question. And then we'll finish up with some reflection at the end on the key points from today before we close, hopefully just before 4:30. Okay, so as I said, we've been on a bit of a journey with this neurocognition roadmap, and I guess to explain where it started. So a few years ago now, I think it was 2017, Phil and I, along with Seda McKilligan from Iowa State University in the US, we started working on a special issue. The focus of that special issue at Design Science was the future of design cognition analysis. And we were trying to understand what the kind of key topics were within this area, what people were focusing on in the field, and where the field might go next in terms of the kinds of questions that we were looking to answer with design cognition research. At the beginning of that process, we did a big workshop at, I think it was DCC, way back in 2018 in nice sunny Lake Como, if I remember correctly, before the world completely changed and we ended up having to use platforms like this for conferences. We had a really good workshop where we did some concept mapping to try to get perspectives from the community on what the key topics and challenges were for design cognition. And although this special issue focused on design cognition, something that kept popping up in the community workshop we did and in the papers that were published in the special issue was that neurocognition was a really important emerging area. So the application of neuroimaging methods and measures to try to gain deeper insights into designer thinking processes and design cognition in the design process. So although it wasn't the major overall focus of the special issue, the process we went through in developing this really highlighted to us that neurocognition was this really important area. The kind of outcome of that special issue, or the main outcome, was this topic roadmap, which, as I said, it focuses on design cognition more broadly, but it highlights design neurocognition as a key focus area. So following on from that special issue, we engaged with the community again in some further workshops. So we did a workshop at DCC in 2020, and we did another workshop in ISED in 2021. And those workshops they focused on trying to flesh out not just the focus areas and the topics that we are interested in, but also what the key challenges are. The DCC workshop, again, focused a little bit more broadly on design cognition, but some of the really big challenges that came up in that workshop were neurocognition focused. So how do we apply neuroimaging methods? What methods are available to us? How do we adapt those for design? How do we incorporate neuroimaging measures into design cognition research? So at the ISED workshop in 2021, we focused much more specifically on design neurocognition and trying to understand what the key challenges were in this area specifically. So the outcome from those workshops, in addition to the special issue that we published a while back, we have conducted some kind of thematic analysis on the outcomes that we got from the workshop. So lots of Miro boards and post-it notes encapsulating people's perspectives and opinions on where the field is currently and where it's going. And we have distilled all of that down to create a roadmap, which you can see here. So this roadmap reflects the views of nearly 80 community members who participated in the workshops and the work that led up to the special issue and the papers that were published in the special issue. And it covers the key topic areas or the focus for design neurocognition research and the key challenges in the short, medium, and long term. So I thought it would make sense to just talk you through a little bit of what is in this roadmap. It's important to highlight that it is a shared document, so it reflects perspectives from lots of different researchers. It's not just me and Phil and our opinion, it's very much the community's view on where things are going. And it is intended to be an evolving document as well. And today we are going to focus on what the next step might be in evolving this to focus on impact as well. Okay, so in terms of what this shows, so there are 4 kind of themes in the roadmap. The first theme is theory, looking at theoretical challenges for the field and the key kind of topics and questions people are focusing on when it comes to theory building. What we found is that there is a lot of focus on exploring foundational questions about the key variables involved in design neurocognition. So things like what brain regions are involved, what networks are involved in different design tasks, what effect do certain designer attributes have, what is the effect of environmental stimuli on the designer's brain activity and cognition. Looking at how you might use neuroimaging to evidence unconscious processing as well. So processing that can't necessarily be verbalized in protocol analysis and in cognitive studies. And there is a lot of focus on how we correlate different measures. So how do we correlate physiological measures, neurophysiological measures, behavioral and cognitive measures to gain deeper insights into design cognition. At the moment as well, there is a lot of focus on how we might start to modify existing theory on design and design cognition. But moving into the kind of medium term, how do we actually start to build and test new theory? How do we kind of start to transition away from the just kind of describing what is going on towards actually building and testing theory and predicting and explaining things? How do we start to connect with theory in other fields as well? So for example, cognitive neuroscience, there's a lot of work on creativity in that field. How do we, as design researchers, connect with that and integrate our theory building with what exists in that domain? And kind of into the longer term, there were questions around how we understand designing in the wild. So how do we start to generate knowledge about design neurocognition that is ecologically valid? How do we move away from these really tightly controlled lab environments into something that's more naturalistic and more representative of how design actually works in practice? The second theme in the roadmap is all about methods. There was a lot of discussion about methods in all of the workshops that we did. It seems to be a really key focus area, focusing on how do we actually do research in this area, what tools and techniques do we have available to us. There were lots of questions and discussion around experimental design. Essentially, how do we do it? How do we design robust experiments, particularly when many of us are not experts in neuroimaging and neuroscience? How do we adapt protocols from other fields? Again, looking at how they do things in cognitive neuroscience, how do we adapt that for design? How do we develop new protocols for design neurocognition research? How do we standardize protocols as well to help us improve the replicability, can never say that word, of our studies. So thinking about replication challenges, which is a huge question for other fields as well, but particularly important in this early stage of design neurocognition research where we have lots of variation in our approaches to things. Similar questions around data analysis as well. How do we do it? How do we adapt protocols from other places and how do we standardize things? And connecting back to theory, how do we improve the ecological validity of our experiments as well? And in the long term, moving towards what a few people in these workshops termed ecological measurement. So how do we get real-time feedback and real-time data on a designer's brain activity and other physiological measures? How do we analyze that kind of data and how do we integrate it with other data types? The third theme which kind of starts to touch on what we're going to look at today, was impact and applications of design neurocognition research. So things like, how do we apply the knowledge that we generate to have an impact on the design process? Can we develop new tools and techniques to enhance designers' neurocognition? How do we, in the really long term, work towards achieving symbiosis between the designer and computer systems in the design process, maybe using things like brain-computer interfaces and other technologies? How do we improve the design process using design neurocognition knowledge? Can we develop completely new design processes? And there was some discussion around how we might increase the socioeconomic impact of design using neurocognition research as well. And then the last theme was infrastructure, which was kind of more on the practical side. How do we get funding for design neurocognition research when we don't really have many clear routes to impact? We work in quite a specialized area. How do we convince people that this is an important area that's worth funding? How do we deal with the trade-offs that inevitably arise between the quality of neuroimaging methods and technologies and the amount that they cost? Having done an fMRI study myself, the cost of doing fMRI is just, it's not very sustainable in most cases. Also things like data sharing. So quite often neurocognition or advancing neurocognition relies on doing kind of big meta-analyses of existing studies. How do we put the infrastructure in place to enable people to share their data sets and standardize across data sets? And there was a lot of discussion around ethical issues, how we address ethical issues associated with neuroimaging and the development of new technologies in this area as well. It's all good and well to sit and talk about all of these fantastic things we want to do, but there's a lot of ethical issues surrounding neurotechnology which have been in the news quite a lot recently. So the key takeaway, I guess, from this roadmap, there's lots of really interesting stuff in there, and we are looking to share this with all the SIG members at some point in the near future, so you can really look at it in depth. But I guess the key takeaway is that there's a lot of focus in the workshops and the discussions we've already had with the community on the kind of immediate theoretical and methodological topics and challenges. So, you know, how do we do things? What methods do we have available to us? Lots and lots of discussion around neuroimaging technology and the difficulties that we have designing experiments and actually applying that technology in practice. Lots of focus around these foundational questions and how do we build this foundational knowledge that we need in order to just have a basic understanding of how brain activity works in design. But there was much less discussion and much less kind of concrete understanding of the why. So what is the point of doing all of this work on design neurocognition? There's loads of really good research out there, really interesting studies, looking at really interesting questions, people doing really, really interesting work. But ultimately, what is it that we're working towards here? What impact do we actually want to achieve as a community? How can we connect all of this fantastic research that's going on with a kind of longer term view, looking at the impact that we have as a field, and what does that impact actually look like? So that's what we want to look at today. It's very easy when we have these discussions, I think, to become a little bit fixated, to borrow a term from the design cognition literature, on what is possible now and what we can do with the tools and techniques and technologies we have available to us now. I think it's a very human thing to kind of latch onto that. But if the field is going to move forward, I think it's really important as well that we have a view on what we are working towards and where we want to go. It's really difficult to think in the long term, I think, and to think in terms of impact rather than what is possible with what we have available to us. And I personally definitely do not have any answers to this question of what should our impact be, what do we want to achieve. And I think this is the reason why me and Phil thought it would be a good idea to have this workshop. It's not an easy discussion to have. but it's really important that we have it and we start generating some more concrete ideas for what we are actually trying to move towards here in the longer term. I think as well, there's been a lot of discussion on kind of the theoretical side of things. And that's really important from an impact perspective as well. I suppose I've been thinking about how we connect theory with practice, but also thinking more broadly about kind of the societal perspective as well. I think design is kind of an innate human ability that enables us to shape our environment. And it probably involves the complex interaction of lots of cognitive processes and different brain regions and different brain networks. But design is also a key driver of change in all the systems around us: social systems, economic systems, environmental systems. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that in design neurocognition research as well. Design research itself is obviously a key enabler of that change. A kind of key overarching goal of design research has always been to have an impact on design practice and change the way that we design. But design research is also a direct contributor to the impacts in these broader systems as well. So it seems that design neurocognition research is in a pretty unique position. It has the opportunity to advance theory about the human mind and brain, and not just how that works in design, but also more broadly in other activities as well, potentially making a big contribution to fundamental questions about creativity, imagination, problem solving. But because it's design research, I think it also has the opportunity to harness knowledge about the mind and brain to address societal challenges. And that's perhaps what sets design neurocognition research apart from, for example, cognitive neuroscience, where the focus is really on trying to understand the human brain and how the human mind works. We are really interested in that in design neurocognition, but it's also about how do we harness that knowledge and that understanding to actually change society and have a positive impact on society. That's kind of one of the key driving forces of design and design research, and I don't think that should be any different just because we're looking at neurocognition. So I was trying to think from my perspective about, where design neurocognition research might have impact, and thinking about things in a bit more of a kind of broader sense. So not just thinking about design theory and design practice. I mentioned there that design neurocognition research potentially could have make a contribution to understanding really big, difficult questions about imagination, about where ideas come from, about creativity. These are all huge questions for cognitive neuroscientists as well. But designers are kind of in the business of imagination and generating ideas. It's what we do as designers. So I think potentially design neurocognition could have a really big contribution to trying to solve some of these, or maybe not solve, but contribute to answering some of these big questions in cognitive neuroscience. So I was watching this TED talk recently on the neuroscience of imagination. And in the description for the talk, they had this quote: "Studying imagination used to belong to the realm of philosophy and psychology. Now neurobiology provides insights into this holy grail of natural philosophy." So this is a huge question that's been studied for decades and decades and decades by psychologists and cognitive neuroscientists. And wouldn't it just be amazing if design neurocognition research could make a significant contribution to kind of cracking that nut? There's potentially an opportunity for us to have a huge impact that goes far beyond just our own field. Thinking about impact on practice, I know my own research team and a few other teams in the community have been looking at how we might apply neuroimaging tools, neurofeedback tools, brain-computer interfaces and things in the design process to create tools that are essentially integrated with the designer's imagination. There are huge technological challenges involved in that, but I think the discussions around this so far, again, have been very high level and quite abstract. Can we think of some more concrete steps that need to happen in order to make this a reality? What do we actually need to do in order to be applying this kind of thing in the design process? How far in the future is it? what kinds of steps do we need to take or can we take at the moment in order to move closer to that? There's also been a huge discussion recently on neuroaesthetics, which is all about trying to understand how human beings interpret and perceive objects around them in the world from an aesthetic perspective, which is obviously super relevant for design. Again, just doing a bit of Googling, I found this interview with someone from Google about how neuroaesthetics will shape the future of design. I don't know if that's true, but what kind of application areas could we potentially see for neurocognition in terms of the user, not just looking at the designer? And lastly, I was thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals. So obviously these are absolutely huge challenges that span lots and lots and lots of different disciplines, but is there some way that design neurocognition can contribute to moving us towards achieving some of these goals? I honestly don't know the answer to that question. There are perhaps some goals that seem more relevant than others, maybe looking at health and well-being, education, decent work and economic growth, contributing to the economy. I really don't know the answer, but it feels like we should be able to make a contribution to this kind of stuff, given our position in terms of being design researchers, but also neurocognition researchers. So I've posed more questions than I have answered. As I said, I really don't know what the answer to this question of what impact do we want to achieve as a field. So I'm very much part of the discussion that we're going to have today, and Phil as well. But I think it's a really interesting discussion to have, and I'm really interested to see what your perspectives are on things, and to help us have a discussion that is a little bit more concrete than some of the things we already have in the roadmap, like increasing the socioeconomic impact of design, which is great, but it's very abstract and high level. And we're going to use a particular approach to help us explore and talk about impact today. And I'm going to hand over to Phil, who is going to explain that to you. And I'm going to finally come out of this presentation mode, which is a little bit weird because I cannot see anyone. So hopefully this works. Okay, Phil,
Hi.
over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Can everyone actually see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, weird. Seems like you can see something different from me, but anyway.
I can see your, like, not the slideshow, just the, like, window.
Yeah, that's
you know what I mean?
very strange. Because I can see the window. Can you see my slideshow now?
No.
Okay. Just do it like this then. Okay, so we're going to take an approach called logic modeling. And the idea here is that part of what allows researchers to be successful is to win funding. And that usually requires us to make some pretty concrete statements about the impact that our research is going to make, and what activities are required to get us there, even if that's quite a long way out. And at the moment, when we look at these roadmaps that Laura has put together, which gives us like actually a very nice strategic view of the whole sort of next 20 years of design cognition research, perhaps, what we see is that there's a very concrete discussion around like the inputs right now that we're working on, and people geeking out about the technology and having fun with all sorts of new toys. And then there are some general statements about like, and if I play with these new toys, something will happen, and then there will be a major revolution in how design is done. Job done for the day. And that's a bit of a problem, because I would say that Laura and I have done quite a bit of reading in this area, and yet we're still unable to answer what is actually connecting these things together. It might be because we're deficient mentally, or it might be that we're not quite there in the community yet. And our hypothesis is that perhaps we should discuss it in the community. So the logic modeling approach is basically to start with the impact that we want to make, which is what's going to be our first discussion. And really the aim of that is going to be to try and make some of these very general statements a little bit more concrete, like improve the socioeconomic impact of design is very, very vague. What does that really mean? What is it for neurocognition research? Then we're going to look at what activities are we needing to do to get there. So some of that will be technology development, but some of that will also be connecting our research to other bodies of research, answering major questions, these sorts of things. And finally, third, what are the inputs that we need for that? So some things we're doing already, but some things we might need to start doing, or some pieces might need to be put in place in order to let this go forward. And then the final discussion of the day is going to be like looking back at that whole picture. What are the key threads of argumentation? What are the key strands that we might want to bring out when we're all making funding applications? Being all of us face that challenge, and all of us are going to benefit from having a clearer language for communicating the impact and the steps that are going to come from our research to generate new insights and new impacts on society. So the first discussion that we're going to do, and I think we're just going to do it in this room because we don't really have enough people to do breakout rooms, is we're going to look at the impacts. So what are the potential impacts of design neurocognition research? Consider the unique position of design research and think broadly, think big and think long term. So perhaps the technology that we need is not there right now, but that's okay for this discussion. Perhaps the theory that we need to do it is not there right now, but that's okay for this kind of discussion. Don't be constrained by the present, basically. However, on the other hand, we need to be much more specific and much more concrete in what we're actually going to do. And this is something that goes across all design research. As far as I can see, reviewing funding proposals and writing funding proposals, it's a general challenge for our field to communicate the specific impact that we make on things. This goes also for design methods and a whole bunch of other specific subdisciplines. But what is it exactly that neurocognition design research is actually going to do that wouldn't be better done by a neurocognitive psychologist or by somebody else in computer science with a more technical lens? Why design? And part of that should be somewhat provoked here by the statements that we have already, which come from you guys and some of the rest of the community. But we've got things like increase the economic impact of design, increase the accessibility of designing, leveraging neurocognition knowledge to increase the social impact of design. And while these are true, they are almost platitudes. So the first discussion is what are they in more concrete terms? Because simply strapping a headset to somebody and giving them feedback on what they're doing does not then lead to organizational performance. What does it lead to? What do we need to target in that regard? So that's the first discussion. And before we get on with that, we're going to have a 7-minute break because that's how long it takes to make a cup of tea, and meet back here at 2. See you guys in 6.5 minutes.
Mark, I don't know if you're still having an issue with your camera and audio. But the way this works is a little... you're there. Okay. It's a little bit odd the way this platform operates, but we'll figure it out.
So welcome back, everyone, or nearly 30 seconds. You can already join the Miro board at the link in the chat. You do need to be on the session to see the chat. Okay. I see most of you are through to the Miro board. It's good. Yeah. So we're going to do it this way. We're not going to have breakout rooms. We're just going to have everyone with their camera and mics on in here. And then we are going to essentially take the three discussions one by one on group one in the Miro board. If you put your name in a post-it at the top in the say hello, and then we'll come down to group one on the Miro board. And go to the end where we've got the impacts, pain. What do we want to achieve? Scientific, practice, and societal. We're going to do a, let's say, 5-minute brainstorm where everyone can put down post-its of what they think more concretely compared to what's already on the shared screen. What impacts are we going to have to really actually translate neurocognition into societal impact? So increasing the economic impact of design is too broad. How do we make that more specific? Yep, so we got 5 minutes starting now. I will make a timer.
Are you able to do it, Phil, or do you need me to do it since I made the board?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
It's at the top, but if you can't see it, I'll just do it. Let's go. 5 minutes.
Thank
Starting
you.
now.
Weird.
Sorry, Phil. Sorry, Laura. I was a bit late, maybe 2 minutes. So could you please just repeat what are we supposed to do in Miro?
No problems. Please go to the mirror board. And
Yep.
then if you go to group 1, you'll see there's lots of arrows waving around, making post-its. And we're going to spend the next few minutes trying to write down like what the more concrete impacts of design neurocognition research might be that would actually underpin, for example, increasing the economic impact of design. It's too general. So what is it more specifically? Is it like improve decision making, reduce errors, increase innovation, that sort of thing?
Thank you.
No problems. You have about a minute. You might also want to color code your post-its to be something distinctive for yourself, because the next part of this is going to be to read out your post-its so that we can start to get an overview and collect them into clusters. You can see my post-its are the same color as my hair. Okay, I guess take a moment to color your post-its and put them where you think they should be. Okay, I think. There's so much more. Okay, so what we're going to do is, in order to make some sense out of this, it would be nice to very quickly summarize what post-it you've put down. And then we will try and move them into clusters. So not associated with a person, but rather associated with themes. For some reason, I'm very fixated on errors and error identification right this moment. So I have 2 post-it notes in that regard. So are there warning signs of error that we can detect before it is manifested? And similarly, are there kind of team dynamics elements that we can detect using neurocognition? So identify team dynamics, issues, and potential conflicts as they're emerging through neurocognition. And there was a post-it somewhere that had reduce error, but that's moved around now. So reduce the failure. So Nicolo, do you want to go next? I'm just going across my screen.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the ones that I wrote down are the one in purple. So probably you see them.
Yeah.
I need to zoom in a little bit. So the first one concerns the stimulation of human brain. So it's something which is very, very far in time, at least from my perspective. We are very far from getting there, but it would be nice if we managed to use some brain-computer interface, not just as a passive tool, but as an active one that it's really capable to stimulate human brain to make everybody creative, so that we will have a much more significant engagement of the society at large within the design process. At the same time, it would be nice if, still using brain-computer interfaces, so devices for neurocognition, as measurement tool, we use them to prevent or to measure, to understand when brain fatigue is taking place due to persistent cognitive load or things like this, because in the end, these are affecting decision-making efficiency and effectiveness. And something which is in between the designer and the user of a product, so far we don't know if the designer is so good that whatever he decides or she decides, it's really capable of matching user requirements, user needs. And in a way, it would be nice if we can use these tools to check if and how much the designer is capable of aligning his intentions with the interpretation that the user will give of future products.
Yep. Okay, I'm just going to shuffle these apart a little bit. So we start to make some clusters at the top towards error detection, perhaps. On the one side,
just to say that
between people.
If I can add one bit on error detection, I'm afraid that if we want to detect errors, it means that the guy who's wearing the headset should be aware that it's making some mistakes. So that's why I prefer to write down that maybe we can try to measure or recognize something like fatigue or persistent cognitive load, which could be the precursor of errors. But yep. I think it's very hard to detect errors per se.
It's a very open topic what an error even is in this context. So, but yeah, so that makes sense. Whoever the next person is, Samuela?
Can you hear me? Okay. I am the one with the light pink color, and the suggestion that I wrote are developing AI tools that replicate human reasoning during design activities. That is more related on the reduce the effort required by the design activities to humans, but supporting them with some automated tools. Then reducing the failure of the selected design concepts, something like being aware of which type of reasoning could introduce some elements that could be related to failures. Something like too much creativity maybe could avoid the diffusion of some solutions. Then optimizing the moment and environment of reasoning for the design activities, understanding which are the elements that lead to the most creative or most effective solutions, and try to define, okay, maybe in the night is the best moment to generate solutions. And then increasing the efficiency of designers' interaction, avoiding biases due to vocalization, explanation of solution, something closer to the reading minds, and to create different communication tools.
Yep. So I'm just going to start to separate a little bit the team side of things with the designer and user alignment side of things. And I would ask you, Samuela, to maybe move the other two pink post-its where you think they best fit.
Sure.
Stenko?
Okay, hi, thanks. Well, I just added two. Actually, they're quite long and maybe a bit complex. So the one is on understanding and improving the role of various design support systems. So, for example, collaborative tools, CAD, and I mean both for individuals and teams. I would start, of course, first with individual activities and then with team ones. But the idea actually to first understand, because I mean that the fact is that I mean all designers and engineers are using design support systems continuously on a daily level. So to better understand their role, this will be actually quite beneficial. And also that's aligned with also with the direction of complementing existing research data in a meaningful manner. Maybe this sounds a bit harsh, but I mean in meaningful manner, so that potentially we could use it as early indicator for certain aspects of design activities. Because very often, I mean, we can, even now it's very hard to let's say be sure what we identified with certain neurocognition, let's say methods and approaches. It's very hard to claim some of our conclusions. So in that regard, I put it in meaningful manner, although I know that it's a bit maybe too strong. Sorry for that.
I think we are allowed to make strong statements about how we feel about the field. You I mean, know how I feel about it. So.
I mean, of course, I mean, I believe that this is still, all these things are still very in the explorative stage. So for that reason, although I think when you're talking about impact, I think that's something where we want to aim as a community. First, to be sure that we are actually complementing something, and that basically we can find some that we stem into the direction of triangulation of data and found something which can be actually beneficial and used then as a proxy for something. Otherwise, currently we are conducting separate studies without maybe not enough understanding of context of design activity that we are exploring. That's it. Sorry.
No, they're good points. If you would like to move them to where you think are relevant or separate them into two clusters, that would be totally fine.
I will, no problem.
Fanica, did you have anything you wanted to add? No. Okay. Mark? Yeah. Oh, Fanica, did you want to?
Yeah, sorry, my mic just didn't work properly. But I think that Nicolo and Stanko pretty much summed up my comments. I didn't have any of mine, so I'm good to go.
Okay, cool. Mark?
Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Yeah, you are coming through.
Excellent, very good. So I've got three. Mine are the kind of the teal, kind of turquoise coloured ones. I actually initialed them because I wasn't sure we were going to colour code them so I could find them, so they're also there. But so the first one is, I suppose, upper left is links to some of the other comments that we've already had. I think it's more sort of using neurocognitive research to enable the democratization of design, so sort of to make more people able to be creative and be designers. That's sort of echoing what people already said. And then there's two slightly down to the right where Laura's looking at the moment. One of the first is understanding design biases of both people and of tools. So to understand how our individual disciplines or methods shape the way that we design. So this kind of links, I suppose, to some of the higher level societal points that Laura made. I suppose if you take to the full extreme, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And this is true also of the design methods that we have and the tools at our disposal. Like if we only use CAD tools, we can only approach them certain ways. But then I guess there's more fundamental stuff that underpins them, whether that's, does the tool shape, or is it to do with the person using the tool? Does CAD make your brain work a certain way and sort of certain networks or processes fire? But then you can look also that if you're, depending on your background and what expertise you have, the way in which you approach a problem as well. Because I think we're very subjective beings, and I don't think we quite realize how subjective and how different we are with our viewpoints. So I think shining light on this, understanding that would be interesting and valuable input. And the other one is kind of interlinked to this, and I suppose it's about understanding how we interact with the world as it is. Whereas so design is a study of what ought to be, but if we want to change anything, we have to decide, sort of make some decision or interaction with the world as it is, and actually trying to understand what do we interpret and what do we interact with and what do we understand. Again, I suppose it comes from that standpoint that the way we interpret the world is inherently very subjective, and yeah, understanding what those subjective viewpoints look like.
Yep, that's really cool, actually. Do you want to move them to some cluster or create a new cluster, I suppose?
Sure.
Laura, did I forget you? I forgot you.
I'm here. That's fine. I was just really enjoying listening to what everyone else was talking about. So I had something quite similar to what we already spoke about, kind of looking at increasing the creative capacity of humans, maybe using brain stimulation, neurofeedback, other tools, which I've moved up to the little cluster up here. I do think there's an interesting question there about this idea of like turning everyone into a designer and where design as a profession stops. And yeah, I don't know the answer. I've just seen a lot of people debating this recently. I also had something quite related actually to what Mark was just talking about, which was, I don't know, the idea of like, could you develop personalized design tools or design methods or design approaches based on brain activity patterns, given that there are big individual differences in brain activation across different people. I don't know where Mark put his post-it, but maybe it goes there.
I couldn't say where to put the lesson together.
Yeah. The last thing I had was, this is maybe a little bit like high level, but the idea that can design neurocognition research actually contribute to developing some of the neuroimaging tools and techniques that we might need to achieve some of the stuff we want to achieve, because we are designers and design researchers. And I know even just from my own experience of working with cognitive neuroscientists, sometimes we've been quite creative and productive in terms of the approaches that we develop and combining together different methods that neuroscientists perhaps wouldn't have considered using on their own and coming up with something new and a different approach to doing things. So that's kind of more on the methodological side rather than theory or impact on practice. But yeah, whether design could contribute to developing new tools for neuroimaging. I don't know where that goes, if anyone else has mentioned anything similar.
I think it's down in that corner is not a bad place. We've got like a green. Has anyone claimed those? Okay, well, I will read them out because I think they're quite useful. So there's a broader insight and understanding of the end user, resulting in disruptive design changes. So less subjective opinion. I think that's... and making it easier for designers and engineers to use human factor data and use it in their work. which is also quite relevant. Like back in the day when we considered design just information processing, I mean, this is the core lens, and certainly we can revisit the processing lens with neurocognition. So that's quite a relevant post-it. And to simplify neuroscience for design research area is also somehow quite relevant there. Okay, so I would just encourage everyone to spend the next 3 minutes adding any additional post-its or connections between clusters. So feel free to draw with either the wiggly line or arrows, or how you think any of these things are related, or add additional post-its that you think synergize or add to or nuance these clusters. Because I'm sadly handicapped in this mirror environment, Laura, would you mind making a timer again for 3 minutes? Thank you. All right, get to it, guys.
Do we have to define any connections, or do we just link stuff up?
Historically, people have struggled to define these connections, but if you do have a solid thought on why it's connected and it's not evident, please feel free to label it. It will make Laura and I's life a lot easier. Otherwise, I just deploy Laura at it with like laser vision.
Yeah, annotations help if you can pick them.
That's the motivation to not annotate, if there ever was one.
Laura is brilliant, but there's a limit. I can see that these linkages are as understandable as they always are in these workshops.
The best are the linkages that go to nowhere. It's like it starts and then it ends in the middle of the page.
Somehow a perfect metaphor for our research there. Okay, and in the last 1 minute of this session, I would like people to take 2 red dots each and allocate them where they think the really important, or let's say where the most impact is going to come from. What's really going to turn over the design field? Or you have 2 dots each, just so FYI. you may need to copy if I haven't made it exactly the right amount.
Sorry, Phil, was that just in a cluster or on a specific?
In a cluster, if you want to put it like on a post-it note that you think you're particularly excited about, then do that. But I think we'll look more at the general prioritization of the clusters is slightly more sane, usually.
Sure.
Nice. Okay. Well, I think that's actually a pretty good start for this discussion because we've got a fairly clear prioritization of essentially making enabling design work in a much more transparent way. So better understanding how designers function mentally and then allowing others to achieve that or enhancing designers themselves. There's a pretty clear rationale between that and impact. The identification of let's say negative situations like fatigue or reduction of failure or identification of potential situations where errors might emerge is again a very concrete and direct pathway to impact. I mean, that mirrors impact pathways in the medical field, for instance, where they've looked at doctors' decision-making processes and stuff. So that's actually a really nice identification. And then I think also, personalized understanding of the design interaction of design tools would inevitably enhance the whole field, right? So I think those are some pretty cool clusters to start the next part of this exercise with. And that's basically the second discussion now we're going to go into, which is what do we actually need in order to get here? So what activities will we need to undertake in order to achieve the impacts that we've identified? Do we need new theory? Do we need new methodology? Do we need new data? Like, do we need access to things that we haven't traditionally accessed? Do we need to change norms in industry? Do we need to build innovation infrastructure to get these things out there? Basically, what is actually needed to translate where we are now into these impact pathways? Again, we'll do the 5 minute. Oh, sorry. We'll do the 5 minute putting down of post-its and then go from there. Feel free to speak as well if you want out of turn, so to say. If you have an inspiring thought you would like to share with people on the way. And you may retain your colors.
Okay, 5 minutes starting now.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, wow, you really picked up the pace with the post-it note production. So
I was going to say, I love how much easier it seems to be to think of activities than impacts.
if I could actually move this block, I would give us more space. Okay. Cheers. We just do it like that. All right, so I've shifted that over the way. Thank you, Samuela. My brain is not functioning, clearly. This is why it's important that we have a workshop. Okay, so we're going to do the same process again, where briefly read out your note post-it, and we'll try and sort of inductively cluster them, and don't be afraid to spread out into the impacts bit. We will draw a line down here just to denote where activities end and impacts start. I'm going to go from Mark across this time with Laura last again. Otherwise, Laura just tells us everything, so you know. It's okay.
I know nothing. This is a far better plan.
Okay, Mark, would you like to start?
Well, sure. So I'm in the teal ones again, which is towards the bottom.
Yeah.
First one's about data sharing. I think just because they're quite resource-intense studies to run, I think sharing this kind of data will be really useful and help to shape better, carrying out better experiments and studies. I think that's true of a lot of areas of design research, not just neurocognition, that we see a lot of people doing the same work, but don't particularly, answering the same questions in different ways. Concrete methodologies. So which outputs are required for which tools? What are the requirements for different methods? I suppose this is kind of, for myself, I'm new to this area, something I'm interested in getting more into, and it's hard to know where to start. So I think sort of having a bit more of a concrete idea what those methodologies should look like. And then the last one is collaboration across different disciplines, or with, for example, with neuroscience or psychology or with signal processing, to kind of look at progressing this area without having to reinvent the wheel, and trying to understand the assertions we can make with the types of experiments we want to do, and then what techniques are appropriate. Because if you look at, I suppose, reading some of the fundamental psychology in the area, it's kind of, they do some really clever things to understand some really tiny nuanced areas of neurocognition, which I don't know about, and I definitely don't feel qualified to do that, anything quite that clever with experiments. So kind of, I suppose, coupling up with people in that area could, increase progress. I think that's me.
Awesome. I've kind of put these, let's say, methodological considerations along the bottom. Fanika, did you have anything?
Yes, I did. Okay, so I have the yellow ones, but a bit darker yellow ones. And what I think that is needed to get is to learn how to actually interpret neuroimaging data. So if we eventually get this data, and we can get them, maybe it's a bit hard considering the methodological problems and also to make them ecologically valid. But even if we do get really great data, what do we do with them, and how do we interpret them, and to really be able to use them usefully in design process? Relationship between this neuroimaging data and cognitive processes should be defined, which is maybe not even on our side, but on the side of cognitive psychologists. And I have a feeling that this relationship is not really defined at the moment. And eventually we should relay this neuroimaging data to other data that are relevant for design, let's say from design sessions, behavioral data, or maybe sketching data, CAD modeling data, something like that, to really be able to support these methods, to say which method is better, is worst, but we should define how to really say what is better and what is worst, how this data can tell us this.
Cool, thanks, Fanika. Stanko?
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm on the same route as what Fanica mentioned before. I would just like to add a few more things. So, for example, work on research methodology to better design neurocognition experiments. I think there are several issues beforehand on several studies before. So that's something that definitely should be. Also, how to define design brief depending on the neurocognition approach. Blah 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 blah. Then, of course, share that we all share as a community, identify the limitations and biases of different neurocognition approaches. I think that there are so many lessons learned and best practices that need to be taken into account while people are people are trying out experiments, especially for the first one. Since this is very early stage, I think that the idea is to share as much as possible so that people do not repeat same mistakes over and over again, which I think it's commonly the case when every individual institution try to replicate some study, they will encounter probably same issues at the beginning. So this will actually speed up the learning curve. Then the following thing, of course, clear data analysis pipelines and protocols. That's also something that I think Fanica and Nicola and I are experiencing. Let's say experiencing recent period. So it's not really clear also which one to choose, how to modify it, how to accommodate it according to the experimental setting where you want to use it, etc. And well, of course, well, I think one of the most important thing is to conduct huge amount of experiments for different types of design activities. So to become familiar, to identify certain patterns, to obtain as much data as possible, to see whether we can find something, and also what we can find. And because I think this could actually help us quite a lot. Of course, I mean, there are serious theoretical issues regarding this and how to link, how to interpret the data with of course, how to link data interpretation with, of course, design in general. But I think also there are huge deficiencies about the stage of design neurocognition as a research approach within our field.
Yeah, these are some pretty good points. I definitely feel you with the shared best practices. If that is something that you have a serious passion about, you should also check out the research notes. And if you think you have something to add to that context, especially in adaptation to design research, then there's definitely an outlet there, which is somewhat new anyway. Yeah, so these are pretty major issues. Okay, Samuel?
Okay. A deeper understanding of social interaction in general, trying to understand how it could impact the designer's activities, and developing a tool that replicate the design cognitive activity as a karaoke, let me say, guiding the designers in doing something as a cognitive activity. In the first moment, you have to generate idea, then select idea with a tool that guides you in these evolving activities. Involve more experts from the cognitive neuroscience domain, trying to be also interesting from their domains, because while we try to understand the design as a whole and complex activity, then when we try to make the interpretation and discussion of the results, a lot of times we take the interpretation from their domain. So maybe it could be some misleading. Accessibility of results for each evidence to be merged when necessary. If I have a good understanding of an activity, maybe it could be useful if I can apply my understanding to other data, but already mentioned point. And finally, try to decompose the conceptual design activity into simple cognitive activities from design cognition, understanding their composition from the biometric measurements, and then try to recognize them during the design activity.
Cool. That's pretty nice. Please feel free to shuffle those around. I've already moved.
Sure.
Nicola?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So during the discussion, I tried to reorganize the ones that I started writing before. Actually, I think that, I mean, what I wrote can be already put into two main clusters, which are somehow related to what already emerged during the discussion. So I think that one of the biggest points that we need to touch is the correlation or contextualization of all the results that we managed to get through neurocognition studies, so that we managed to create a link with what already exists in design cognition, psychology, creativity. Since so far it's very hard, according to what also Fanica said, we need to learn how to interpret neuroimaging data, but beyond that interpretation, it would be very, very important to becoming capable of linking those results as soon as we interpret them to what already emerged in design cognition studies. The goal here is that if we manage to find this correlation, would be to define estimators, which could be, well, we can call them whatever we want, fingerprints, signatures, but something which is very characteristic of brain behavior, so that we can start learning what's in general the dynamics of brain reasoning, the way the brain works. And in the end, I mean, still on the side of estimators, it could be important to understand what can lead to cognitive load, as we decided that one of the most important clusters were about errors and potential factors that are not so effective in design. On the other hand, I think that there is a set of other post-its that you find on the left-hand side, which are mostly on the side of networking, creating an infrastructure so that we can benefit from all the work that is done in the topic, but at the moment it's not exactly very well coordinated, I would say. So it could be interesting to share a roadmap with all the researchers that are carrying out studies in neurocognition, just to share experience and to see what are the best practices to design experiments and to set the purposes that we have. Because in the end, it would be very, very important to start sharing on a data repository which is available to everybody, so that we can try to build on what the others already managed to collect as data, since data collection is one of the most painful things ever, at least from my experience. And so it would be important to build on top of what the others are doing. But in order to do this, I'm afraid that we need to consolidate a standard interoperable experimental protocol for data acquisition. And we need all of us to be aware of what are the biasing factors, depending on what is the tool or the technique or the device that we are using to collect the data, since we observe very different biasing factors that are, let's say, making our signal dirt or not as clean as we would like to have. So these are my main points, spread around now, but it's they were there.
No, I think they were very nice points. I'm actually quite surprised at how much methodological stuff is coming out of this discussion, but perhaps I shouldn't be. But yeah, there's some serious challenges in getting real data out of this, right? Laura?
Yeah. Okay, so I guess kind of tying into some of the things we've said about the difficulties in like interpreting neuroimaging data and knowing what to do with it, and just generally how we actually carry out these experiments. Maybe training or education, or someone else mentioned learning from mistakes and sharing best practice. I think that's really important. Having gone through an fMRI study myself, having absolutely zero experience in neuroimaging at the beginning. It was a very, very painful process. And still now when I look at, I feel like I've learned a lot, but when I look at what they do in cognitive neuroscience, it's just like whoosh. And it feels like a very, sometimes an almost insurmountable gap between the knowledge and skills that I have and what I feel I need to have in order to be proficient in this area. So training, and also just thinking about collaboration. Obviously collaboration across disciplines with cognitive neuroscientists and psychologists and other people working in this area, I think is really important and helps to fill some of those kind of skill gaps. But at the moment, we don't necessarily have very like sustained and accessible network in that area. And actually part of the reason for setting up the SIG in the first place was to see whether we could bring together the design neurocognition community with members of communities in other areas. So like the neuroscience of creativity, there's a big community there that I think we could interface with in a more sustained way. So I'm not sure we need mechanisms to support that. I also wondered about whether we need more of a dialogue with practicing designers and industry on what their needs might actually be when it comes to some of these tools and things we're talking about creating way into the future. Just because sometimes in design research, we have a little bit of a habit of creating all these new methods and tools and not really considering the designer's needs from that perspective, which results in us creating lots of stuff that doesn't really get applied. I don't know if anyone has engaged in that kind of dialogue before, but it might be interesting to do. What else did I have? Yeah, also on the topic of developing design tools, I mean, if we're going to develop these BCI systems in the future, neurofeedback systems, things that are actually viable to use in the design process, then I think there needs to be some serious development in the neurotechnology area as well. And maybe that's not something that design neurocognition research does directly, but having tried to use some existing brain-computer interface technology to do stuff with CAD, it's not really feasible at the moment with the technology that we have. So I guess development of commercially viable neurotechnology is quite important. And the other thing I had was just more of a general comment connecting to something that someone else said earlier, and I can't remember who it was, but someone mentioned that maybe we need to break designing down into kind of more simple activities that we then study with neuroimaging and try to understand those and kind of build up from there. But I wonder if that's the right approach. Like maybe it's more that we need to develop neuroimaging approaches that allow us to study more complex activities. I don't know. Just there's been a big debate on how reductive neuroscience can be and whether that really tells us anything about real world brain activation and cognition. And that was me, I think. All of my post-its have disappeared, so I think I've covered them all.
All right.
That's okay.
Okay, the two green ones are by Tommy, but he's not in the chat, so I'm just going to read them out. User-friendly experimental tools, very relevant to what Laura just said. And then test tools and methods in the application area, e.g. developers and companies. So sort of real world studies. So that's somehow related to how exactly we're doing experimentation and studies. And then we have a strategy and methodology post-it that I don't know who put down. It's just floating. Does anyone know what that means? No. Okay, then it dies. Okay, cool. We've got a few minutes left. We're going to do the exercise again where I would like you to link things just for a couple of minutes. Have a link blitz. And then after the break, we will think about what ones are the really key pillars that are needed to support the impact, but we'll do that after a break. So link, 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 or think, link, or whatever. Okay, that's pretty good work, actually. And I think then it's really time to reward yourself with a cup of tea or coffee, or water, or gin and tonic, depending on how you approach the afternoon. And we'll come back at 3:10 past 3. My brain needs to work. And then we'll quickly vote on which ones we think the core pillars are here. And then we'll take a discussion of where are we right now, which I think can be a little bit shorter, and then maybe brainstorm the best ways to communicate the whole sweep of this to funding bodies so that we can all get that sweet, sweet cash that we need. See you in 10 minutes. I will be here drawing circles in the meantime.
Thanks, Phil.
No one was here to experience that joke. It's actually looking pretty good, I think.
Yeah, it looks great. There's a lot of stuff on here.
And actually, some really concrete things that I do think can really help the community communicate this stuff. So
yeah,
it's actually very nice. I have no idea why the screen sharing is suddenly not working, but for me, I could see the slideshow and everything was just...
I don't know. I think we're doing pretty well with the technology, given how unpromising it seemed earlier, so it's all good.
I'm quite glad that we didn't need to make breakout rooms, mind.
I'm so relieved. I'm so relieved. So I'm gonna go grab coffee.
1, 2, 3, 4. All right, welcome back on this lovely Monday afternoon. I'm sure we're all feeling super fresh now. So we kick off this last session with fast dot voting on what we think the core activities are that need to be done anywhere within the black bubbles. So 1 minute. Do your dots, dot your doots. Awesome. So before we look at the big picture, we're going to look quickly at, are there any other things that we have right now that we're lacking, that we need in order to, I think we've already covered this a little bit in these activities, so I think this should be relatively straightforward. And it's much more concrete. So like, do we need people? Do we need particular bits of research? Do we need specific bits of technology or equipment, specific bits of data, or other types of support that are the inputs for these activities? So there's going to be a close connection here. And we're just going to do that in 5 minutes. We put the post-its down. And then I think move on to the bigger picture discussion. So, all right, so 5 minutes. Why every time? Off you go. Awesome. I particularly like the time and funding post-its because isn't that the truth? It's also one of the motivations for this workshop, because if we need time, then we need funding, and if we need that, we need some justification beyond. We're design researchers, and isn't that cool? Okay, so this time we are going to start with Laura, because why not?
Sure. Okay, yeah, I was the funding person. It made me laugh because immediately after placing that, someone else put the time one down next to it. I'm not sure who that was.
It's the whole workshop.
A few other things I had were peer reviewers who understand neurocognition. So I know there's a growing community of us who do neurocognition research and presumably can review each other's papers on this topic, but I have had a few instances of having my paper reviewed by a person who I don't think necessarily understands the research. And I guess it probably also goes for funding proposals as well. I also had buy-in from industry. We need more of it to help us secure participants. I've had a lot of problems trying to convince companies to let me have their designers to take part in my experiments. Methodological guidelines would be helpful, sort of maybe along the lines of sort of how-to guides, but within reason, because I don't think you can explain all of neuroimaging in that way. Data repository, maybe. I don't know if that's something like, do we want a specialized data repository that within the Design Society, for example, or do we want to add to the many existing data repositories for neuroimaging data out there? And the other thing I had was behavioral measures that we can actually gather data for during neuroimaging experiments. So a lot of existing neuroimaging methods place constraints on things like sketching and verbalizing and all of the data that we normally use to evaluate behavioral measures. So how do we deal with that? And that was it, I think.
Yep, that's super nice. I'm going to be cheeky and do my one post-it. Next. So I think we need a better way of explaining the... So I wrote cross-disciplinary explanation in theory and methods, as in, like, why is it worth messing up these nice, neat neurocognitive studies by including sketching? Because my interaction with psychologists has been like, why are you doing all of this messy stuff? It means it's hard to control unless you don't get the value out of the study in terms of advancing cognitive theory. But obviously, we want to do something slightly different from that. And I think there needs to be a clearer articulation of what that means theoretically and what that means methodologically, and then where the trade-offs are in making that kind of decision. So should it be more clean and that's more abstracted, or should it be perhaps messier and more close to design, but perhaps more pragmatically relevant? I think that would help a lot. Nicola?
Does it work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, as you see, I tried to make my job a little bit easier, since I took a few things from the right-hand side and I shifted them to the left-hand side, since in the end, I think that those are elements which are lacking, at least the ones in the black circle. Obviously, we are talking about exactly the same kind of lack. So we can even collapse them into just one single post-it. I think that we are lacking estimators that describe brain behavior, or at least something which clearly point us to some specific cognitive activity that we know from the previous experience that we had in design cognition and so on. I share the pain of collecting people that can take part in these kind of experiments as subjects, because it's exactly like that. And I noticed that someone also mentioned students here, because typically those are the ones which are let's say, largely available, let's say largely with reverse commas, but let's say much more available than professionals. And in the end, we know that if we run some studies on brain activity, whatever it's the tool that we use, every brain works its own way. And in order to find a general pattern, we need to collect a sufficiently large data set to observe some emergent behavior which is common and shared among different subjects. So this is probably the largest and the most problematic lack that I'm experiencing, and I'm afraid it's also the one that everybody needs to face. And probably COVID also stressed the situation kind of a lot because of the need of cleaning up everything. The other element that I wanted to raise is that, well, in the end, we still don't know exactly what to measure. In some cases, we would like to measure, I mean, if someone is dealing with fMRI, maybe it's a matter of understanding what's the behavior of oxygen in the brain. I'm much more expert in EEG, expert still with reverse commas, but let me say that it's not that easy to say if the best way to analyze the data that we collect, it's based on the evoked potentials, or if it's something that should refer to power in general terms of something which is mostly focused on the specific power which is dealing with a specific task. So measured as a difference from a baseline, which is what we call task-related power. What are the effects of tiredness on task-related power? So are we observing really task-related power, or there are biasing effects there? I think that those are elements which are, I mean, these are elements of knowledge that we are lacking at the moment, and it's crucial to address them as soon as possible, the best way we can, in order to achieve the impacts that we wanted to, and we mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Fanica, just to be confusing.
Sure. Sorry, just a second.
All right.
Okay, so I have 3 points, which are pretty much in line with what Laura and Nicolo already said. So I have a feeling that at the moment we are missing kind of the experts' thought on what we are doing and what we are trying to do, really to have somebody to tell us what we should measure if we want to get something out of the data, and what is the right protocol for pre-processed data to analyze data. So what are these measures that we should use? Plus, we also don't have that many studies with experimental data. So we have some literature reviews. We currently have some suggestions for in terms of methodologies and frameworks, but not so many studies that really report experimental data in many diverse design activities. That's all for me.
Awesome. Samuel?
Okay. And here in this phase, it seems like all the elements are differently related to general problems. So a lot of the stuff that I pointed are already mentioned in somehow. People to be investigated, that it was one of the main elements of Nicolo, the student sample biases. That means how we can say that if students do something in somehow we can replicate this conclusion to general population. Then on the same element, also the reliable data. What I mean is on different levels. For example, just putting some biomedical device on a participant, how we can say that he is his behavior is going to be the same of without that devices. Then the correct conversion of the result in something useful. We are in the exploratory phase, so we are far away from the direct conversion in somehow what we found. The validation of theory is something that is still weak. And then validation of the protocols and design of the experiment from cognitive neuroscientists that could be a useful element to be more robust in our research. And then on the same level, defining standards in the research, but we know that is a problem in general for design research. But what I mentioned, that we know that designing a wheel could be very different from designing a shuttle, and how it could imply some different elements in brain activities or whatever. And finally, the understanding and interpretation of brain activities that is still in their infancy, also in the cognitive neuroscience or neuroscience in general.
Awesome. Thanks very much. And Mark, do you want to hit us?
Sure. So I've got at the top I put in time, after I saw Laura put in funding, because I suppose that is the precursor to actually putting in any sort of application. You need to get some groundwork for what you're going to be doing. So yeah, we need some time to do that. I put down data sharing and analysis script sharing, so that's kind of, I suppose, links into best practices and also reproducibility. So not only do sort of people publish their papers with what they found, but they also show how they did it, so you kind of see a bit more of the nuance of the methods that are used to get to their conclusions. I wondered about whether the SIG, which I'm not actually part of, but could lead training or could establish best practices as part of that, so they could kind of look at running workshops or helping to spread what those best methodologies to use would be. And then last, I put down conferences or journals outside of the area of design that we could attend or publish in, with, I suppose, a couple of different aims. First, to, I suppose, almost get more validity of design neurocognition outside of just the field of design in a research area. It might also be more enticing for collaborators from other fields as well, who want to sort of publish in their areas or their journals, and then also to attend other conferences and network and meet other people in the area. There's a motivator for that, and that's me.
Awesome. It's a pretty good point about the finding publications and outlets that are valuable to multiple fields is kind of nightmarish. So yeah, it's a good point. And then we have again some post-its from Tommy, who's not in the video part of the chat, but he has we have some industry academic collaboration. So the sample kind of there's a high we have high computational power. Data storage is cheap, so like I guess technical support for analysis and things. And then proof of concept validity for industrial stakeholders. So kind of the flip side of reliability is like credibility of results, which actually goes quite nicely as a counterpoint by validation by cognitive neuroscientists, and like real world credibility somehow go nicely together. If you want to move any of your post-its around, do so now. Otherwise, let's do 2 minutes on linking. In particular, this exploratory understanding and interpretation of brain activities, I'm not 100% sure where to put. So I would very much appreciate your help there. Aha. Thank you. Okay, that's a pretty good set of activity. And really the last discussion is, I'm not going to ask you to vote on this one, because I think if we all vote for peer reviewers who actually know what the hell they're talking about, which might well be, it might be depressing for all of us. So I think we can take these as equally important elements that we need to develop to bring the field into the possibility of taking steps forward. And I think it was a good point. I mean, Laura and I are kind of helping to run the SIG, obviously. Well, Laura is running the SIG and I'm just the monkey helping her. So yeah, we need to think of better ways to actually support the community as opposed to just doing these workshops. But I think our aim with this workshop itself is to understand better what we can do. And I think it's already pretty clear that there's some things that we can concretely do. Not least of which is provide this argumentation for you guys also to use when you want to make applications to funding bodies, and probably translate it into some citable source that can be used in such a context, because that always helps. So the last discussion really is with that in mind. We want to look at the whole picture again, basically. And the idea here is that in your experiences of either reviewing funding proposals, writing funding proposals, receiving reviews on funding proposals, what are the key arguments you think that are going to cut across this and give us that time and funding space? And because this is kind of grown monstrously out of the scope of the little template that we had naively prepared, I would suggest we do this along the top. So where the group 1 label is, we do post-its along the top, where you think there's like the key arguments. They're going to translate these challenges and activities and impacts into really the must fund points for us. And I think that's something we can also then take back to the field and get some more concrete discussions around with funding bodies as well. It's something that we can definitely start to gather experiences as part of the SIG, and look where we can all learn from each other, because we can be honest in saying that design research is not overfunded in almost any context. So it would be good to actually learn a bit more how we can tap into this money that neurocognition has. So yeah, I think we can open it up to thoughts on what are the killer arguments coming from this on making this a must fund as opposed to a nice to have. No pressure, obviously. So 5 minutes, and we go along the top where the group 1 label is. Starting when Laura starts the timer.
No, a few seconds ago.
Okay, thank you. It's quite a tricky one, that action.
Yeah, I feel like we need a whole workshop on like
No.
writing
No
proposals
more workshops.
or,
No.
or some kind of like proposal writing group or something.
I think there's quite a lot of proposals written across the community, but we don't learn from each other very much for various reasons. I think that could be definitely improved by some sort of coordinating society. Wouldn't know who to point to for that though. Okay, so we're going to just quickly run through this, and it would be great if you kind of roughly positioned it along the line where you think it's most relevant, your argumentation. So the entities using neurocog devices on their employees have less stressed workers, more participative design processes, worker empowerment, and less accidents is really a nice articulation of impact. Who wrote that? Nicolo. Oh yeah, you're purple. I should have remembered. I am really sorry. You're just a purple.
Yeah, it's okay, no problem. I mean, I tried to figure out what we can try to measure, what could be the KPIs to justify this. I mean, then you see there are several question marks, as I'm not so sure at all. But
I think they're really good points. Like, we would want to be able to say that, right?
Well, if we would be able to do to say that this, it would be great. Let me also say that there is a small part concerning design here, since part of these impacts concerns also profiles which are probably not really related to design at all. Because if we say that if we measure brain activation or neurocognition in general in workers, maybe not all of them are designing something. So I think that if we want to stress something on the side of design, neurocognition, I think that it would be very, very important to stress more on the importance of design and why we need to study design from the neurocognitive perspective. Because so far I see that the impact, it's mostly on the side of neurocognition and lightly on the side of design neurocognition. Yeah. So,
but I think this is a massive question for the whole design research field. I'm also doing some work on design methods, and we don't have good answers for that. And they've been going since the 60s at the very least. So it's a really good point. And it's something we should have much better answers for as a community and as a discipline. So it's a really nice aspirational statement to start this off on. And a lot of the others connect to it as well. So that's a really good starting point. Laura, do you want to do your red one, right? You're red.
Yes, I'm red. I find this really difficult. And I think it's like the $1 million question for this entire workshop. But I had, sometimes maybe it's about, or certainly the funding bodies that I apply to, which tend to be like very engineering focused and very focused on producing tangible things and like immediate shorter term impact. So maybe it's about communicating the need for these like shorter term theoretical advances in order to enable the longer term impact that we were talking about right at the beginning of the workshop, which is going to be like transformational. But we can't do that unless we have these shorter term theoretical advances. I really struggle communicating that, those who like EPSRC in the UK who just do not seem to care about that at all. And the other thing I had was maybe also, I mean, funding bodies are really big on interdisciplinary research, or they certainly are in the UK. And this is a very interdisciplinary area, potentially, like design, neuroscience, psychology, like technology development, BCI stuff. So maybe it's about being able to articulate that aspect as well and kind of appeal to the interdisciplinarity buzzword that seems to be used a lot just now.
Yep.
But that's all I had, really.
And I think, although Tommy is not here to present it in the chat, like his post, it's a really nice one on who are the beneficiaries of design neurocognition results. Because actually making a really concrete impact claim is quite critical there, actually. I think the next logical person is Samuel.
Yes, the one point was very similar. Defining the real impact on design processes, less waste material, time, and so on. But Nicolo formulated it better. And another point is trying to involve some clinical aspect in the research, just to answer to the funding part that maybe could be useful, understanding that for a particular activity involved in the design processes could be done with some activities that could be more suitable for people with pathologies. And then another initial point is creating a new typology of researchers or community with competencies in the useful domain required for the research.
Yeah, this is an awesome point, actually. And it brings us nicely to the present context where there are neuro kind of researchers and there's design kind of researchers, and getting that like mutual benefit in the middle is really challenging. Is also something I find like that's very present in behavioral design right now, is that there's behavioral scientists and designers, and trying to get the synergy benefits is very, very difficult. So trying to get a community that understands both sides of that coin is really hard, and it's even more so in this context. So it's really nice, and actually brings us really nicely to Mark, whose both points are kind of positioned underneath here. It's
Yes,
like I planned.
First one, so the left is validation that the experimental results actually mean something. So it sort of links back to the identified need for robust methodologies, which comes from validation to other fields, metrics. So I think somebody was talking about sort of estimates for brain behavior. So what sort of electoral metrics you want to be comparing? What range of participants do you have to have meaningful results? Because it seems like that seems like a very fundamental block to have in place before you can articulate a need for a research vision. You have to show that what you're doing is actually sort of doing something that's verifiable. And then I think I'm sort of repeating what most people have, well, a number of other post-its have said, which is about framing the importance of neurocognitive science on engineering design, but in such a way aside from just a tech push, because you can kind of, it's quite easy to say, well, you could, I think what Laura said about making something or some sort of product you can get out of it at the end, but it's, I suppose, trying to articulate that other stuff that you can find out along the way. And I think adding to, I think it was Laura about the potential for interdisciplinary impact. I think interdisciplinary working is inherently not short term. You've got to be quite long term, I think, in your thinking. There's some quite interesting stats on sort of interdisciplinary papers and kind of how they're very lowly cited at the beginning, but in sort of 10, 15 years, they become very highly cited in that time. So kind of, yeah, I guess it's just an inherent challenge of working in a nascent research area such as this one. Oh yeah, that's me.
These are some nice points. You're a postdoc or are you a PhD?
I'm a postdoc, but I'm new to this area. So yeah, I've been trying to do this in my spare time.
Fall off my chair if you're a PhD, because this is some pretty mature points for a PhD student, but some very nice points for a postdoc. So this is cool.
Thanks.
Cool. Okay, and I think that's a really nice point to kind of end the slightly the workshop in general. And I think if you zoom out, you can really see that we've actually done quite a bit of work. We have like 23 distinct themes, at least, across, and over 100 post-its, each with quite a nice point. And I think quite a lot for Laura and I to tear into, and quite a lot also to compare and contrast with what we've previously seen, which has been much less concrete and much less connected to impact than what you guys have delivered today. So I think that's a huge step, actually. And I think it gives us a really good platform for pushing the field forward, because it allows us to I think, put together a document now that people can really start working with. And I think we can also start to accumulate lessons learned from funding proposals around these themes and see whether new ones emerge, and start to share that expertise across the community, because realistically, like, Niccolo winning a massive grant benefits everyone just as much. Well, I mean, not quite as much, but like just as much as Niccolo it benefits us all to build that credibility. And that's what has happened in other areas of design research, that there's been people who've led the way, and then that's benefited the whole community. So I think we can drive for that. Certainly, I think that's what I can offer. So good work, everyone, from my side. And I'm going to hand now back to Laura with the vision and the brain to close the session.
Yeah, like, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Phil, for facilitating that. It was excellent, and I think really enjoyable as well as very productive. So great job. I really look forward to delving into this Miro board in more detail. It was extremely optimistic of us to make a template so small. So I'm glad to see that we have completely dispensed with that. But yeah, really good discussion. It's also given me lots of ideas for potential ways that the SIG could be more supportive for the community. And I know not everyone here is a member of the SIG. I can tell you more about how you actually join if you want to. I do have some slides, but I'm kind of reluctant to share my screen again because it makes all the people disappear, and I prefer actually talking to you. So I will in a second share stuff about the SIG, but I guess my key observations, I don't know if I really have much more to add other than what Phil has already said. I think it's been super useful. We do plan to go away now and interpret all of this output and take another iteration of the roadmap that we've been developing. And the intention is to share that with the SIG members, but also to get it out there into the broader community as well. So we'll look to do that in the near future. And yeah, one of the key reasons we did this today was to try to kind of understand this question about funders that we looked at the end, and also just to get your input into the impact question. But as I said, I've got lots of ideas about kind of how we could potentially support the community going forward. So I think when I am interpreting this Miro board, part of what I'm going to be looking at is trying to identify what the key needs of the community are and what the key kind of opportunities are where the SIG can help you and support you, ultimately to develop what I hope is a thriving and impactful design neurocognition community. It's quite a new, well, it's not a new area. I mean, it's been bubbling away for quite a long time, but I feel like we have maybe a bit more momentum at the moment than we've had in the past. I see new faces popping up in this area all the time, and there are loads of publications coming out. So it feels like this is a kind of critical point in the field's development. And I'm really keen to see how the SIG can support that going forward and really help to continue that push and building that momentum. The only other thing I wanted to highlight was just, if you want to become a member of the SIG, it's relatively easy to do that. I can share my slides to show you. I'm not going to miss this platform when we're done with this workshop. Okay, so we do have, there's a web page, a website for the SIG on the Design Society site. So if you're a member of the Design Society, you can go onto the main Design Society webpage and find the SIG area, and you'll find the CDS SIG website. If you have any questions about the SIG, or you want to join and you're not sure how to do it, or you're not a member of the Design Society, but you want to be involved in the activities and the community going forward, just get in touch with me. My email address is here, and you can also find it on the web as well. And a lot of people ask me how you actually join. So if you are a member of the Design Society, just log in on the website and go to the members dashboard and just select the SIG from the list of available SIGs for you to join. And that's all you have to do. And then you will appear in the list of members in the network area for the SIG. And if we are sending out communications, we will make sure that you are included in that. But as I said, if you're not a member of the Design Society and you want to get in touch, stop sharing the screen, that's crazy. Just drop me an email. But yeah, I think that kind of brings us to a close, unless there's anything else you want to add, Phil?
No, I think it's mostly that we are very much of the attitude that success for one is success for all. So
yeah,
especially in this emerging area, we need everyone to be better, and everyone has the chance to be more successful. And I think we want to facilitate that as much as possible. So if you do have some thoughts on what you could do with in terms of support, like, now is a good juncture to get in touch with us about, because I think we are somewhat approaching the end of what we can do meaningfully with roadmap-y type of workshops. We need now to think crystallization of this, building a foundation for the community to bounce off of, and then providing everyone with the tools to go out and actually win some funding and do some papers and put us on the map as a community, so that we can start to then take these next steps in interacting more credibly with neurocognitive researchers and interacting more credibly with funding bodies and things like that. So
yeah, definitely. I think the roadmap is the roadmap is not the overarching purpose for the entire SIG. It's kind of intended to be a means to an end and a jumping off board for what we do next. So yeah, definitely get in touch if you have ideas for things you need support with. Oh, we have an announcement. Does everyone else see the announcement, or is it just me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much for taking part. As always, it wouldn't be possible without you. Nicola, do you want to say something?
Maybe Fanika.
Yeah, my mic is actually going crazy. I don't know if you can hear.
Oh, no. We can hear like a robot version of you.
I just wanted to check if you run regular meetings of the special interest group, because in that case, I would be glad to participate. I mean, if you run these kind of meetings, if you don't, maybe you will, and then in case I will be glad to participate.
Yeah, we don't at the moment, but
I think we're a little bit, we've been a bit cautious about these sorts of things, because we're trying to figure out what's the best bang for your buck, if you want to know, if you know what I mean. Like, we all have so many meetings and workshops, and some of the other SIGs, without naming names, have kind of become ego projects, or just, I mean, not in our community, but in the DRS community as well. They've had some problems with it just becomes a meeting of friends and they don't do new stuff in a way. So there's a balance of trying to how to be dynamic and also community friendly and stuff. So I think we're going to take this as a juncture to figure out what's the real value next.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying this as I enjoyed the discussion today, and I would be glad to go on thinking together about what could be the next steps.
The same here.
Okay, that's cool, because then we need more engaged people, actually. Not loads, but a few.
It's a treat or an invitation?
Oh, always both.
I went to a workshop that was more
same time. That's how we roll.
So I don't know, we were out of sync, but I went to a workshop which was more BCI related, and it was to do with and it was interesting there because the guy had been doing this research for about 15 years, and he kind of talked through basically what he'd done over 15 years and what had worked and what hadn't worked. And so that kind of retrospective, which you don't get from papers or that kind of thing, is really interesting, especially when you've got researchers who are more experienced in this area that can share a lot more about their work than what's recorded in papers. So I think that kind of thing from the perspective of people who are new to this area would be really valuable and interesting. as an idea. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think that kind of connects to some stuff we were talking about earlier in the discussion about understanding mistakes and lessons learned, and how that's almost just as important as seeing the final output from the research, and what, as you say, what you would normally see in journal articles, the kind of polished final version that we present to the world. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, because you never learn how to do something, you just learn how not to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
At some point you arrive at something publishable.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time figuring out how not to do things. I think that was the main portion of the fMRI study I did, the time that we spent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if I'm coming up to for DCC in Strathclyde, so I guess I will.
Yeah, I should probably have mentioned that. Yes, we are having DCC at Strathclyde in July, and I know a few of you have registered, so it would be super cool to meet up and maybe have a bit more of a relaxed chat about some of these things over a coffee. So yeah, for sure, I will see you at Strathclyde.
Sounds great.
Cool. Okay.
Cool.
Phil, you left us for a second there, but you're back.
The platform just stopped, so I was like booted.
Okay. I think
Laura, do you want to talk for 2 minutes after?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to, Phil, jump onto Zoom maybe? Right? Because I think this is on. Yeah. Okay. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Cool.
See you
Thanks a
soon.
lot. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
See you. Bye bye.